Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
Welcome, one and all. It's time for the Books That Make You show, and I'm your host, Desiree Duffy. And today, we are talking about books that make you find the strength and courage to reclaim your life. We often find inspiration in different ways. Reading and learning other people's stories is in many ways a way for us to find our own empowerment, right? When you slip into the skin, the point of view of somebody else who overcame challenges in their own life, well, it can help us find our own freedom. Our guest today is a woman who did just that. She was raised inside of a bizarre cult in the 1950s. She was removed from her family and forced to live with 39 other children as part of some kind of social experiment from the time that she was just an infant. She was given a new name, told that the church leaders were to be called Daddy and Mama. She wasn't allowed to go to movies, listen to popular music, and she didn't even know what it was like to eat in an actual restaurant or talk to boys. That was forbidden. And the threat of physical abuse, well, that was always there. Patricia Walsh Chadwick's memoir is called Little Sister. Now, she has gone on and graduated summa cum laude from Boston University with a BA in economics and is a chartered financial analyst. She is the founder and president of Raven Gate Partners, LLC. Raven Gate Partners is a consulting firm dedicated to providing businesses and not-for-profit institutions with education and advice about the financial markets and the global economy. She has a 30-year career in investment business, culminating as a global partner at Invesco. She has led quite a life. Patricia, hello. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. There's a lot of ground for us to cover. So can we start? And I know you could probably fill up hours telling us about this strange cult. It was religious in nature, right? It was derived from Catholicism. Can you tell us a little bit more about it and what it was like?
Yes. And I want to say that it started off as a wonderful organization. It was really a club of sorts for students at Radcliffe and Harvard, Catholic students to come together and meet and socialize and also talk about, important issues, theological issues, philosophical issues. And it was at that point when my parents were there and met. My father having been a naval officer throughout World War II, my mother being a very young 18-year-old convert to Catholicism. And then it morphed into something different. And it changed when the priest, who was a renowned Jesuit, Leonard Feeney was his name. He was a poet, he was an author, he was renowned around the world, and he became the chaplain. But he took a very stringent interpretation of a Catholic dogma that said you had to be Catholic to get to heaven. And we know a lot of religions actually say that. You got to be in my religion or you don't get to heaven. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, for this organization that my parents were now part of, the local Catholic authorities said, we don't want you, espousing that point of view. And this small group of basically 50 adult people refused. And so they were, for all intents and purposes, kicked out of the Catholic Church. And they formed a religious order, even though some of them were married, and there were 12 married couples, that they called themselves the Slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. When they did that, I was 5 months old. And shortly thereafter, they grouped together. My parents sold the house that they had bought on the GI Bill and took all of the money, gave it to this group called The Center. And they donated all of their wedding presents to this place. And little by little, when I say it was a cult, and I didn't write the word cult in my book at all, because to me it was my home. And I didn't think of it as a cult even while I wrote the book. And it was my daughter, who was in her 20s, early 20s. And she said to me, Mom, you have to accept the fact that you grew up in a cult. And it was only then that I thought about it, because little by little, what they did was they kind of strangled the individuals. They separated the children from the parents. The parents were forced to take vows of celibacy, changed everybody's names. We weren't allowed to talk to our parents anymore. And we became truly a religious community in which it was expected that these 39 children were also going to grow up and become members of a religious order, which was not something I wanted at all. But I knew I had no choice in the matter. I knew it was the destiny that I would have. And interestingly, when I was in my teenage years, I fell into a series of crushes, and they were the most chaste and innocent things because I knew nothing about what it meant to have a crush. I didn't know why it happened, and I didn't know what to do about it. But it was determined by the time I was 17 that I wasn't going to be very good material to be a nun. And so they were right about that. And so at the age of 17, right, when I finished high school and we were all schooled, all 39 of us within our community, I was kicked out. And I was kicked out. My parents were aware of it. They were told, they were not asked. And I left my parents behind, my siblings behind. I didn't know the language of the world. I had never heard a swear word. I had never heard even a slang word. And there I was out in the world with no money, no guidance, no mentors, no confidants, just on my own, having to make it.
You were a stranger in a strange land, and that strange land was the world just outside your front door, and you never experienced it before.
That is correct. Because we never had television or radio, never saw a magazine, never read a newspaper. That was all considered part of the terrible influence of the outside world on our lives.
So what did you do? How did you manage?
So I was allowed, and the center paid for me to go to a secretarial school. Now, interestingly, I had already been accepted at both Bates College, where my father had gone, and Vassar, because the state authorities in Massachusetts were told that we weren't being educated in a way that was standard. So to prove it, they had me apply to those two colleges, and I got into both of them. But I was forced to write a letter saying I was not going to attend. So I knew that I had had, in a certain way, a very wonderful education. Mm-hmm. But the only thing that the woman that ran the place, who was called Sister Catherine, all she would allow me to do was go to a secretarial school. And when after 6 months of that, I was now on my own, I was offered a job there teaching typing, which was a far cry from the intellectual world I'd had really growing up, where I studied Latin and Greek and history and, mathematics and everything. And that was the kind of world I wanted. But I had to start basically teaching as a secretarial school. That was my first job. And I then had enough money at $2 an hour was my wage in 1967. And I got myself a little room, you could almost call it a cubicle, at the YWCA, where I shared bathroom facilities. It was like a dormitory of sorts, but much smaller than any college dorm room my children ever experienced. And that was the beginning of my life in the world.
So you really did start at ground zero and worked your way up, because where you are today is just amazing. And I want to talk about that a little bit. But first, I'm curious about your family. So your parents let this happen. There was no, we need to help her. They were fine with everything that was going on.
Well, they were, I will say, they were not, as I mentioned, we were not allowed to talk to our parents while we were there. I mean, we would have a meeting every 3 or 4 or 5 months for 45 minutes with our parents. So they really had, in a sense, they had given over control of my upbringing to Sister Catherine and the cohort of people that she surrounded herself with, a group of 8 women. But when Sister Catherine said I was to leave, they had no choice but to basically go along with it. They stayed, but I will tell you, they entered my life in a way that they hadn't been in my life for the 12 prior years, because I was 6 years old when I was separated from them. And so I appreciated that. But I will tell you also, when your parents have not been your parents for 12 years, and you are now an 18-year-old. You don't really look to them who have lived a world completely, a life completely segregated from the world. You don't look to them as mommy and daddy at all.
Right.
And I will say they cared, they loved me. I always knew they loved me, even during the kind of emotionally trying times of growing up without being with them. My father would break the rules all the time. He would whisper to me, "Happy birthday." And we didn't even celebrate birthdays. If he would be working and I would pass him and he would just wiggle his little finger at me like that, as though to say hello. And for me and for my siblings, I had three younger sisters and a younger brother. For all of us, that kind of breaking of the rule was to me the glue that held me together until I was able to talk to him at one of our meetings. And that expression of love was very, very important in my life.
Oh, it's amazing how something so small can have such a profound impact.
Absolutely.
In a way, it reminds me a little bit of Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, living in this very sequestered, ordered. Yeah, you're not in your head. Did you feel? I mean, at the time you didn't know because you hadn't obviously read the book. The book didn't exist then. But in retrospect, a lot of the dystopian novels like that have that feeling, that sense of you're being controlled by somebody. Do you identify with novels like that?
You know what? I don't actually. I mean, I see them as comparative, as illustrative. But for me, remember when I was growing up, I barely got to read anything outside of the lives of the saints. So the moment I was a free woman, I started reading biographies and stories of the real world, because I was so, enamored of learning about whatever really made you tick in the world. So fiction became really a secondary interest of mine as I tried to gobble up all these books and read as much as I could and find out how people did things and what made them move and shake. That being said, you are right. In those kinds of dystopian settings and stories that are fiction, they have some basis in fact. We all know that. And so I do see now much more than I did even 20 years ago, how, that is part of the cycle of life for certain people.
Yeah. You lived it. You didn't need to read about something that actually was experienced by you.
So I wanted to read about the things I hadn't done and how I could achieve some of them.
So how was that? I mean, do you have any examples of like you didn't know how to get on a bus, or you didn't know how to go to the bank or get your hair done? I mean, was it just like learning to live life? And how did the outside world look at you? Were they like, what's wrong with her? How come she doesn't know, how to go get her groceries? Did you have that happen?
I started off very quietly. I had big eyes and big ears and small mouth. I said very little. I engaged in a totally quiet social way. And I read, as I said, and learned about things, and little by little started to, open up. But the fact of the matter is, I was 60 years old when I started writing the book. It took me 10 years to write it. But the fact of the matter is, I had only told 3 people the story of my life before I started writing it. Now, I'm not saying more people didn't know. Of course they did, because there were people who had been friends up there, or my own family, and all of our, brothers-in-law and cousins and all of that kind of people. But I never told the story. I told it to my husband. I told it to a man that I had been with before my husband. And I told it to my closest woman friend. And that was it. I went through my whole career on Wall Street never telling anyone, because I didn't know how to do it. And I didn't want that to be the object of a discussion. If you ask someone, so where did you grow up? And they say, I grew up in Chicago. Oh, where did you go to school? Blah, 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 blah. That, it's a 3-minute conversation. I knew mine wasn't a 3-minute conversation. So I just avoided the subject. And believe it or not, I managed to get through. My roommate in Philadelphia for 2 years, when she read it, she said, I cannot believe I knew none of this. But now that I have, told the story, I am very comfortable talking about it. It is just, now it's open. But I'll tell you one thing: of those 39 children, sadly, 6 of them have already died. But of the rest, at least 2/3 of them have come and said, "Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for bringing that story out. I did not realize how much they had suffered from PTSD. I didn't realize how much time so many of them have spent in therapy. But one of them said to me, you've made it okay now to talk about my life." So I feel very blessed that I wrote the book in that regard.
And that's the amazing thing about a book like this. I mean, being able to help them, because for all intents and purposes, they were your siblings. They were like family to you.
They were. And the reason the book is called Little Sister is because all the little girls in this community were called Little Sisters. And the boys were little brothers and the adults were big sisters and big brothers. So my mother was a big sister, and I called her Sister Elizabeth Ann. And my father was Brother James Aloysius. And that was the way I addressed them until they left in 1969. So 3 years after I left. And interestingly, 2 years after I left, or I was kicked out, the woman that ran the place died. And it was then, as is often the case in a cult, that the place started to crumble. There was no follow-on leadership. There was no one who probably even knew how or wanted to continue much of what was happening. And with that, the children came out and told the stories of physical abuse. Fortunately, this was not a place that had serious sexual abuse issues the way one might have expected. But physical abuse was appalling. And when the children finally came out and told their parents, the parents then got up in arms, and then many of the parents left around that time. And by the 1971 or 2, for all intents and purposes, all the families and their children had left.
And it just crumbled and it went away.
Well, they became reunited with the Catholic Church. And one of the houses where we lived up in Harvard, Massachusetts, became our Benedictine monastery. And the other, granted, all of the big brothers and sisters, for all intents and purposes, have died now. Maybe there are 3 that are still living and they're in their 90s. But they lived a quiet and peaceful life, a religious life, but one that was open to the rest of the world, that was gracious and helpful and embracing of other people. So that entire monasticism, outside of the fact that one of the houses became a monastery, a Benedictine monastery, but with much more openness than had been the case while I was growing up there.
Excellent. And how did or does it still impact your relationships in your family today? Was it unusual for you to have your own family when you didn't grow up in a traditional family unit?
Well, I feel very blessed. I've been married now for 35 years to a man I would marry again. I have twins. They're 26 years old. And it has been wonderful. And when my parents left, let me tell you, they were the most extraordinarily wonderful grandparents to not only my children, but to my siblings' children. It was a beautiful time. They left in 1969. My father died in around 2007, and my mother only died 2 years ago. And my mother read every chapter, every line of my book.
Oh, she did. Okay.
She did. And my father and my mother, I told them when I was 55, I said, I'm thinking of writing the stories of my childhood. And I said, because when I look back on my childhood, I do not look back with anything but a certain pleasure. And I know it sounds insane and crazy, but my mother read the whole book and she said, parts of it make me sad, but she said, it's all true and you need to publish it. So I was very happy that I had, in essence, both my parents' blessing, even though my father died before I really started putting pen to paper.
Now, how was the writing process for you? It sounds like it was very therapeutic to get that out.
That's really interesting because in a certain way, I didn't feel as though it was cathartic. I was writing the story. I will admit there were times when I would cry. There were other times when I would feel as though this giant boulder was in front of me and I couldn't get over it or under it or around it or through it. And other times I could just write and write and write and write. Interestingly, the second book that I'm writing now about my Wall Street career and starting at the bottom of the ladder is easier to write. And I think that is in one sense because there is not as much emotional content. There are some crazy and funny stories. But I did go to memoir writing classes. And that was so important because while I was on Wall Street, you're writing about business stuff. Simple declarative sentences, point. Buy the stock, you sell the stock, whatever. But creative writing, you have to go in scene and you have to bring the reader along with you. And I loved that process. In fact, I'm addicted to writing right now. And I write a column and I write blogs, which are, on my website. But they're I love it. Truly, there was one cathartic story, which happened after I was kicked out of the center. And I shared it with my agent. I had not planned on telling the story. And I told him about it. And he said, here's my suggestion. Write it if you can. And then if you want to take it out, we will take it out. It is a Me Too story. I wrote it before the Harvey Weinstein news came out. And I thought I was 1 in 5 million people. Of course, now I understand I'm probably more like 1 in 5. But the fact of the matter is, once I wrote that story and read it, I said, it's on paper, it's okay, it can stay.
Aww.
So I appreciate my agent so much. But interestingly, that was the hardest story to share.
I can only imagine. And that's great advice. And whether or not a woman or anybody decides to share a story like that, just putting that pen to paper can be such an experience.
Yes. And it was a story I had not told my parents.
Wow.
Because I blamed myself. I thought, how could this have happened to me? Not realizing that it was happening all the time.
Right. Now, what advice would you give to others, to other women or people that are in some kind of a suppressive situation that need to break free? What would you tell them?
It's interesting. For me, the best way of dealing with it was to have processed it before writing about it. That was for me. Now, I think many people are familiar with an array of memoirs. Memoirs are quite popular these days. And some people write them when they're very, very young. And if you're reading a book and the person hasn't processed it, you can sense it in the writing. I think for me, it has been gratifying to be able to write the book as an insider, but also from the outside. And one of my editors gave me the best advice. And she said, in a memoir, remember, you are both the narrator and the protagonist. And when she said that, I was like, a barn door opened up for me. Whoa, I can both share the story and analyze the story and put it in context. And it was such a wonderful piece of advice. So I think, someone said to me too, I have a wonderful memory. I am just blessed. But someone said, you must have written a diary as a child. Where did you hide it? And I said, no. I said, maybe because there was no opportunity for me to write a diary. Therefore, I knew I had to remember all my stories. But the fact of the matter is, I would strongly encourage people to write their thoughts down. Because if I had written thoughts down back when I was a child or a teenager or even a young adult, I could have probably gone back and gone, whoa, that's what I said to myself on that day. Mm-hmm. That was what I was feeling. Now, our memories are always a little bit flawed. But if you have notes to go back to, you know that you can put yourself back in the place where you wrote that. So I would encourage people, it doesn't have to be writing that is sophisticated. It can be notes to me. And, many people, the Queen of England writes a little note in her diary every single day. I'm not disciplined enough to do that at all. I admire her. But I do think that I would encourage people to take some notes. And, some of my references going back are more that when I had no money at all, I would keep track of every single penny that I spent. And I kept those books. So that, in a way, became my memoir. And I'd look back and go, oh, your dry cleaning bill was $1.43 for the month. And
Let's talk about your business, your career, because you just, like we said earlier, you rose up from the top and you've accomplished so much. Tell us what that experience was like.
I really, really, really did start at the very bottom of the ladder. I became a receptionist at $2 an hour for a brokerage firm. And I took the job that I was offered. I didn't even know what a brokerage firm did. And if I had been, in a used car, sales office or a travel agency, maybe my career would have been entirely different. But there I was, and I will tell you, this was a time when there were no women on Wall Street for all intents and purposes. I had some of the greatest mentors in the world. They were all men. I started in 1968. And I have so many people to thank, and I will thank them in this second book that I'm writing, for which I haven't yet chosen a title. But there were so many people who cared, and it's really influenced my life because I was mentored in a tremendous way. And I worked very hard. I don't deny that. But people would give me an opportunity. I was only 1 year on the job when they sent me to New York to collect the checks for a big deal they were doing. And it was $5 million I had to go and collect. And I came home that night and they took me out to the Ritz-Carlton for dinner. And I thought, I can go somewhere. And it was that kind of confidence in me that someone would have that would lead to the next. And, as a career woman, I think you have to take the luck that you get. And I'm saying this for a man too. You will get luck. Lady Luck comes by and you need to grab that. And when Lady Luck is not there and you feel you've hit a glass ceiling or whatever, you've got to use your own pluck and just pull things together. If there's a glass ceiling, there's a side door out which you can go and you can get a back road up to the top again. And it depends on, what your motivations are. And for me, as I kept on going, I kept getting the thrill of the career, and I just loved it. For others, you can go off on another tangent, perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. But when I'm advising college students, I like to say, because they'll often say, "Is it bad to change jobs?" And I said, "No." I said, "It is not, provided you keep something in mind, that you're going up the circular staircase, that you don't just keep going sideways. If you're going to change, and you can't change, every 6 months, but if you change, it should be because you're taking a bigger challenge on, and there's more opportunity for you, and there's more responsibility, and there's more fear that, you could fail, and so you'll make sure you don't fail because you'll work extra hard." So that's kind of how I look at the career side. But I was so gratified in my career. And now I do a lot of consulting and a lot of counseling to college students and to sixth graders in a Catholic school in Harlem.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's fantastic. And you're giving back. That's what it's all about, right? Is taking your experience and giving back to the community.
And it feels so good to do that. It's really a wonderful way to live.
When can we expect the second book? When do you see that coming out?
It will be, depending, there's coronavirus and then there's how fast I can get it done. It'll probably be out you never want to bring, probably either a year from now or a year and a half from now, but it won't be longer than that. If I can really get my act together, it could come out next fall. Mm-hmm. Don't. But I'm working very hard on it, and it's going well. And I've got a wonderful. I've got my publisher already lined up. The guy that published my first book said, "I will publish your second book." So that I don't have to go find a publisher. So that part's very exciting.
Excellent. Well, your current memoir is called Little Sister. Yeah. Can you tell people where people can find it and your website, if you have social media? Give us all your details.
Yes, and it's in paperback now, and it also has Kindle and audio version.
Nice.
My website is patriciachadwick.com. That's pretty easy. You can go to Amazon. I think it's mostly the paperback, the audio, and the Kindle versions are there. But if you go to my website, it will lead you right to a way to purchase it.
And you blog on your website too, so people can read.
patriciachadwick.com. Yes, and I do write a lot of writing now, so I have a lot of blogs. I've got one coming out tomorrow on Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Write quickly, but And it comes very much from my Catholic upbringing. And of course, she was a wonderful Jewish jurist, but there was something I found very much that I admired in her that really came from my own Catholic upbringing. So that will be up on my website within a day, I think.
Excellent. I love it. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us today. Everything that you've done is an inspiration. Your book is an inspiration, and I appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today on the Books That Make You show. And you can find out more about us on our website. It's booksthatmakeyou.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Coming up in October, the 24th and the 25th, we are doing the Book Fest again. So you'll be able to watch the live stream of that. We're going to have all sorts of author panels and conversation, books, contests, and so much fun stuff going on. So make sure you visit us at thebookfest.com as well. And again, subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch that, as well as all of the episodes from the Books That Make You show. Until next time, all of my bookish buddies, please do me one favor and enjoy all of the books that make you exactly who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.